Hello, I'm Jack Militello. I'm a professor of management at the University of St. Thomas in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'm going to talk to you about strategic management. And what I'm going to do is give some definitions and theories of strategic management, and then we'll have some examples of companies and how they manage themselves strategically. I'll talk about one or two tools of strategic management that'll help you think better about the process. And then we'll end with a bibliography to find places where you could research the topic and take the learning forward on your own. First of all, let me begin with my definition of strategic management. It is concerned primarily with the actions organizations take to achieve competitive advantage and create value for the organization and its stakeholders. Now, this is really a two-part definition. One is creating a competitive advantage. Firms want to be better than others in their marketplace, at least in some definitional way. They have to give customers a reason to give them their money, essentially, to be as direct about that. Why are you different than somebody else? We all make those choices. We all know about differentiation. We all have our favorite place to buy this or the favorite place to shop. We understand what differentiation means. It's a very customer-focused direction. But also, in creating a competitive advantage, what we want to do is add value to the customer. You're getting something from us that's really important to you, but also we recapture value for the organization, meaning we make a profit. And without a profit, we're really stuck. We really need a profit to move our investments forward and to develop the organization. Now, how does the strategy of the firm create value? And let me talk about 5 points of creating value. First, the firm's strategy defines its ultimate value proposition in terms of those who it is serving. So the first point of value is understand the customer and define yourself in light of the customer. Now, you might have a number of different customers and you might have different value propositions, but understand who you're going after and what's of value to that customer. For example, buying a car. I would ask you to say, what's the best possible car to buy? Some of you may say Mercedes or a high-end car, but really the best car to buy is the one you're driving. You've made those choices based on value. Maybe you're a soccer mom and you need to throw 5 or 6 kids in the back and haul them around town. Maybe you're a young sportster and you like to drive fast but within the speed limit, and you like the look of the car. Maybe you're a car buff and the horsepower makes a difference to you. So you get my point, is that value is different customer to customer. There isn't one ultimate value of a product. So understand the value proposition is built around the customer. The second thing, a strategy is an overriding purpose that can align and mobilize all parts of the organization. It's a cliche in a way to say we all need to be on board, but it's true as well. We find in our research here at St. Thomas that organizations that are aligned, where all the principles of the organization kind of hang together and people buy into that, do far better competitively than organizations that are not aligned. And this is important to understand, that a unified focus, and not necessarily lockstep, but an agreement on overarching values is very important for an organization. There may be different means to get to that value, but to have an overall purpose is something all organizations need to have. And that's what strategic management provides for those organizations. The third point, the strategy should be exciting and challenging for everyone connected to the firm. We like some place to come that has a real value. I mean, think of Apple Computer in its early days, the stories of all-night pizza parties and rock bands coming in. And the lore throughout the industry was, boy, this is a weird place. People are very excited. Young people are really interested in working there. And we've seen that in the high-tech boom where a lot of organizations will put pool tables, skateboards, whatever, to build excitement for young people. Those of us that aren't so young also like to get a little excited. We like to know that we're providing some real value for people, that our time is not wasted. This is not drudgery. This is something very positive for the organization and for society at large. Next, the strategy should identify the business the firm wants to be in and differentiate it from others in its marketplace. It shouldn't define the business you are in. It should look to the future. Strategy is innovation. It's forward-looking. Otherwise, why do it? And I think our strategies have to push us a little bit. In fact, sometimes organizations may have to push you a lot, especially in changing economic times. But look for strategic management to be aggressive and to say that it's a mission. A mission is a challenge. It's someplace to go into the future. And the fifth point, the strategic management should contain broad-based goals and specific means of measuring progress towards those goals. Sometimes goals need not be met. Sometimes goals are learning processes. In fact, I would maintain that there is no such thing as a failed strategy, that we should be learning as we move ahead, and that we may make changes in the strategy, and goals may need to be adjusted as we go ahead. But set goals, but more importantly, set the measurement techniques and how you're going to see progress is being made. In business, the standard measurement, of course, is the quarterly report. And I think it's a very, very valid way to take a look at the future of an organization. If you could succeed quarterly by quarterly, you're going to succeed in the long run. If something bad happens in one quarter or 2 quarters, you have time to adjust. So again, look for goals, but more importantly, measurement towards exceeding those, measurement towards meeting those goals, I should say. Okay. With that said, let's begin to look at how firms really strategize. And in front of you is a graphic that shows some different types of strategy. You can see on one axis we have a deliberate point of view moving across to an emergent point of view. On the other axis we see outcomes, profit maximization, and political outcomes. And usually firms manage strategy in terms of what I call the classical approach. You analyze, plan, command. The strategy's in the hands of the CEO or the analysts in the company. What the strategy is, again, very, very deliberate. We plan well, we meet our plan, and we succeed. Doesn't always happen that way. But if you looked at standard MBA courses, especially through the 1980s and 90s, the classical approach was the one we talked about all the time. The maxim from Napoleon Hill's famous 1911 book, Think and Grow Rich, is what a lot of classical strategy is about. Think about it, plan it, and good things will happen. Maybe, maybe not. But I think you always begin a strategic management process with a classic approach. But what may really be happening in our economy today is more of the evolutionary approach. We're still profit maximizing, but strategies emerge. You keep costs low, and you keep your options open. In the evolutionary approach, what you really try to do is look at your core competency. What are you able to do? And take a look and see how the market's moving forward and where you could be in the market with your core competency. Again, back to Apple Computer. Apple had a computer competency. They changed that to a miniaturizing competency. So they came out with the iPod, excuse me. Then they moved to the iPhone, now iPad. They've really changed their product line and the value they provide to customers. But that has all emerged from their basic technology. They've learned how to do it better. Look at firms that are good at mergers and acquisitions. The first time they do it, it's awful. Everything falls apart. But the 10th time they do it, things work very, very quickly and work very smoothly. To give an example, I'm on the board of a company that was sold recently to a company that has made 12 major acquisitions in the field in the last 5 years. It was one of the smoothest acquisition processes I've ever seen. And that's because the acquirer was used to doing it. They had a core competency and applied that core competency. And I think they'll continue to acquire and continue to be successful with that core competency. As we look to the lower right, we see process, go with the flow. Now this changes a little bit. Can strategy be political rather than profit maximizing? Yes, sometimes it is. Sometimes you go through a strategic planning process, not so much to see how you're going to be competitive, but maybe to get people on board, to move the organization forward, to settle political problems or issues within the organization that relate to alignment. So sometimes this is a strategic pose, is to make sure that people are on board and moving forward. Look at also on the systems approach. It's deliberate but political. A systems approach takes advantage of the environment, and we see what happens in the environment, and we shift as the environment changes. Also, I think with systems, we look beyond the organization itself, and in systems, we have a bigger perspective. Take, for example, healthcare. The healthcare world is, some people say, a system. Some people say it's just a mess. But nonetheless, what we have in healthcare is we have the provider-patient transaction. But to make that transaction work, we have insurance, we have medical devices, we have pharmaceuticals, we have hospitals, we have retail. We have a whole world of service providers and deliverers that shape the healthcare system. Look at the banking system. And we've seen that, unfortunately, in the late 2008 or so, when the banking system began to fail. We understood the interrelation between parts of the system. So when you start looking at systems, you look far beyond the organization, but it's still deliberate. So looking at this chart, what we see is types of planning. And of course, we live on the lines. No types of planning is pure. But I think what's happening now in our worlds are evolutionary strategy, emergent strategy, is developing to help us meet the changing environment. And also system strategy is becoming stronger because we're trying to figure out how to deal with the complexities of our world today. It's not as simple as one firm competing with another. It's now about all the factors, both global and regional, that affect the decisions of a firm. Okay, so that's how our firms strategize. What I wanted to do here is focus a bit on the systems approach. And let me give you some aphorisms about systems. One, the systems approach begins when first you see the world through the other's eyes. And that's becoming more important for us now. And not only others' eyes, but also the world. We're seeing how medical devices in Singapore are changing how medical devices in Minnesota are developed, for one. We're seeing how shipping has changed the mood of goods being moved from one country to the other or one part of the world to the other. We're seeing high-tech development in India and China. We're seeing all sorts of things going on that are affecting jobs and wealth in this country. And so, but look at it from the perspective of our partners, either in Europe, Asia, South America, or wherever it may be. Also, look at it in the eyes of the competitor. Look at it in the eyes of the customer. So anytime you're really doing a system strategy, you have to look at it from an other's perspective. The systems approach goes on to discover that every worldview is terribly restricted. So while we're looking at our own worldview, our own planning worldview, and in relation to others, we understand there's flaws all over the place. That no relationship is clean, no competitive environment is pure, and this gives us opportunity to improve. And as we look at the systems world, we look at those opportunities not only to improve the system, but also to improve our own position within the system. There are no experts in the systems approach. And that means that don't look for the pundits to tell you what's right or wrong. Keep looking at the markets. Keep looking at the relationships. Keep looking at the value. And this broadens strategic management. You have to look far beyond your closed system, beyond the world that you're comfortable in. And don't take someone else's word for it. Gather data. This is part of the systems approach. Find out what people are doing before you make your decisions. With these flaws in mind, the systems approach is not a bad idea. I mean, the notion of taking a look at your organization beyond your immediate circle is very, very important. And not only to look at it in terms of kind of global systems, but even regional or local systems. How do other forces affect you in strategic management? Now we've shifted to another chart that might be a bit complicated, but I think this is how the strategic systems approach works, and this is how the methodology of strategy works. There's 7 steps in this model. And I'm just urging you to realize that this is a slowed down thinking process, that we work a lot quicker. But there's some key things to look at in this model. First of all, look at that double line. We have the real world, which is the world of transaction, and then the systems thinking about the real world. And that's the strategic planning part of strategic management. But if you look at number 1, things usually start with a mess. And how do we know we're in a mess? We usually feel it. People tell us about the mess. We're faced with kind of irreconcilable situations where we don't have the standard outcome. We can't say, gee, we did this last year, now we'll do it this year. Things have changed in such a degree that we have a mess. Our old ways of solving the problem don't work. Now we have to leap into the notion of strategic management. So with the formulation of the mess, we begin to sort things out. We begin to use our strategic tools to see how the problem is expressed. It's almost the Rumpelstiltskin approach to management. Remember, Rumpelstiltskin was the elf, and the only way to get power over Rumpelstiltskin was to mention his name. So number 2 is Rumpelstiltskin. We want to define the problem. When we begin to define the problem, when it's no longer a mess, but really a problem to solve, then we could start working at it. And we'll talk about this a little later. There's a couple tools that you use to move from the mess to the problem expressed. The most famous, of course, is the SWOT analysis, where you look at strengths, weaknesses internally, and your opportunities and threats externally. But there's numbers of tools to be used to help you move from number 1 to number 2. So once you've kind of understood what the problem is, then you start looking for number 3, the root definitions of the relative activity and systems and stakeholders. Now you move into the system. You say, okay, where's the cause and effect? And you start looking at things about, gee, if we solve this problem, what other problems occur? In economics, we call that unintended consequences. We want to look to see what are the consequences, either intended or unintended. So number 3 gives us that root definition, really refines the problem expressed into some actions that we can do. And we talk, number 4, we talk about the theory of those actions and define it in terms of the system. So now we're moving into a thinking process. We have our cause and effects, we have our scenarios, we have our opportunities. Now we develop the concepts. What's going to work or not work? And once we do that, now it's the real risky part of strategic management. We take those concepts back into the real world. And what we want to do is compare our model with the real world. And this is where we do testing. And again, sometimes you speed this process quite quickly, but here's where you have focus groups, or you test a price of a product, or you take a risk and you eliminate something and see how the market responds. Pricing is one good way to do this, or positioning of products in the product world. But somehow or another, we have to compare our idea to the real world. And again, there's no experts here. The real world may tell us things that we don't want to hear. It may change our concept. So we may find ourselves going back to number 4. But if the comparison works and you move forward, we find out what's desirable and feasible to change. And then number 7, we finally act. And I say finally, this is a thought process. We don't just jump into strategies. In years past, and there was a cliche in business that was coined by Tom Peters and Robert Waterman in Search of Excellence. It was ready, fire, aim. And the idea was that you're biased in terms of action. Yeah, that's nice to be biased in terms of action. But if it's not thoughtful action, you wind up with really bad outcomes. So this process that you see in front of you, this system strategic methodology, is to make sure that you're really ready, aiming, and firing. And when you fire, you're closer to the target than just a random shot, or just kind of jumping into some decisions that are made the way you've made them in the past. So again, it's a slowed down model for what the real strategic process is. And you do this in groups. You do it with your management team, or you do it alone. But that's a systems methodology to help you help you think through things. Now, in order to understand this methodology a little better, or what to do, I'm going to talk about some basic tools in strategic thinking to help you work from that number one and number two. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the definition of a value proposition. And the value proposition really sets your strategy. And what is it? It's a way that you're going to talk to your customer or your partner or your supplier and understand where the mutual value is, what you have to offer, and is that good for them. There's a model that I use that's developed by two people, John Tracy and Fred Wertzimer, in a book called The Discipline of Market Leaders. This book has been around for a long time, and it's in the lexicon of management literature. And they do something very, very simple. They provide us with what we call generic strategies. And they say there are 3 generic strategies with which we work. You could say your strategy is to offer best cost, best product, or best service. All right? So that's the value proposition. Best cost. You know, Walmart's the best cost. You go there because it's cheapest. You know, it's the best cost. Best product, well, you might say Apple right now is best product. Best service, when people talk about service, at least in our region, they talk about Nordstrom, the department store being a place that excels at service. But you can come up with your own examples. Now, when you set your strategy, what you want to do is make sure that you service one of these, that you should be known as a best cost, best product, best service. But you can't ignore the other 2. Again, in our research here at St. Thomas, we found that firms that focus on one show a better competitive advantage than firms that do not focus. You can focus on 2, but be cautious when you focus on 2 that you don't lose overall focus within the company. Focusing on all 3 with the same degree of intensity will get you in trouble. Also, there may be an evolutionary process here as well. If you look at the development of products, take example Hewlett-Packard. You know, the myth of Hewlett-Packard, or at least the lore that Hewlett-Packard is built around, is the 2 men working in their garage coming up with the best product. That was great. So you come up with the best computing product, and then you find a few people who want to buy it. Best products are usually very expensive and rare. And people have to hunt you out for the best product. Consumer Reports tells you where to find the best product. But then as you develop the best product, you begin to serve people, and more people get to know about it. More people get to know about it, you need to scale the process. Then you might move from best product, to best service. Now you're into best cost when you start scaling, when you start building your company. So you could fluctuate among these things, but at any given time when you're doing a strategy, you should focus on one. So remember, best cost, best product, best service. And this is part of a business model. And you know, the business model becomes very, very important because you set up a best cost company. And what you want from a best cost company is consistency about cost within that firm. Walmart, again, best cost. And they look at everything in terms of best cost. Their supply chain management, how they order, even now how you check out. For small items, or in a lot of Walmart stores, you check out with your own swipe. There's no more cashier. Efficiencies. That's what best cost is built around. Best service is built around building it for the customer. You have it my way. You do what I want. I mean, custom tailored clothing is one. A lot of men's stores, for example, now don't have off the rack. For the same price, you get an off the rack suit. You could have your own fabric or design the way you want it. They make it for you. It's a little more expensive than the best cost, but it's yours. We understand that that you have a real pride and ownership. When Dell Computers started selling computers, they sold on service. They would ask you either on the phone or online, what do you use it for? How does it work for you? Who are you? This is designed for you. So that's a best service company. And understand that you need people in a best service company that are going to be willing to talk to you. Think of consultancies. Think of IBM, the world's largest consultancy. A consultancy has to adapt to people. They have to tell you what's your need. You can't be selling off-the-shelf products and those kind of service organizations. It's got to be for the customer. And then best product. It's got to be great. It's got to have some bells and whistles. It's got to be unique. Think of anything that you've purchased that's best product. You want to show it off. You can't believe what I just got. The iPad. Boy, I mean, it's a shiny object, but boy, it stands head and shoulders above other competitors in that field. And people take pride in it. They show it off. Best product. We like that. And you get a lot of best product companies, not only Apple, but 3M is a best product company. If you take a look at 3M's research lab, they're always taking their scalable products like tape or glue and doing something really unique with that product. Taking it beyond just the scalable commodity. Looking at something that's durable, exciting, works for the individual owner. It's a great deal. So understand where you are in this system of value proposition and how you differentiate yourself. And that's very much a part of strategic management. So that's one tool to begin looking at, strategic management. The next picture you have there is a SWOT analysis, but a SWOT analysis in a different way that you may tend to see the SWOT analysis. In my experience as a teacher and consultant, I always found that firms reverted to list making in SWOT analysis. They said, let's take the strength list and we make the strength list. Let's take the weakness list and we make the weakness list. But we don't integrate them. And what you see in front of you is a 2x2 matrix that tries to integrate strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is, I think, how strategies are really developed. For example, if you have an internal strength and there's an external opportunity, you better be ready to jump on that opportunity. And again, this is the emergent part of strategy. It's not that you're not going to analyze this very, very long. You're going to say, you have these strengths, and you're going to proceed to move forward with those strengths. Likewise, if you have an internal strength and an external threat, you have a competitor or something, your strengths ought to be developed enough to meet those threats. At least to create a neutral environment so the threats don't hurt your business. If it's a new entrant or a new product or a change in the economy, your internal strengths should override those external threats. And again, look at what strategies you have for the balancing of internal strengths with external threats. Then you move down a little bit, and you have this idea of internal weaknesses and external opportunities. I mean, this is key. If there's a great opportunity and you can't meet that opportunity, either give it up or you build your internal strengths. And so you work hard at your internal strategies. Go back to those political strategies, the not profit maximizing, but the political ones. That's when you want to really build your alignment and build your internal team. So you're strong enough to take advantage of opportunities. Of course, you're in big trouble if you have internal weaknesses and external threats. Then you're in a position where you really have to design your organization. But that could be a wake-up call for you as well, to say, well, here's the threats of the environment. Here's where we are. We don't have the resources to do it. And this is a lot of times when firms start assessing their value. They look for mergers, maybe to sell the company. Maybe this is where a change in leadership is appropriate. There's numbers of strategies that can emerge from that. But what I'm suggesting is if you take a look at a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which helps you take that mess and helps you put it into a more definitional framework. Don't make lists. Look at it as analysis. And analysis means pairing those two sectors together and coming up with what you might think are real strategies. And this will move you through that strategic process. It'll move you from 1 through 7 fairly quickly. A similar tool is what I refer to as a core risk analysis. And here, you have the same kind of 2x2 matrix. But if you start looking at your core, meaning what's your ability, a hard look at your human resource performance. What value do you provide? What can you do? And do you have a strategic focus? In other words, do you have a focus like, are you a best product company? And to make sure that your core assets meet best product. Then we have well-defined assets, well-defined focus, and you're aligned for competitive advantage. I mean, that's the ultimate competitive advantage. When you look at your strategy, how you manage yourself forward, and back to this notion of internal alignment. That's where you want to be. And likewise, it gives you something to discuss with your staff or business. When you may have a weakly defined focus, you take a look at your value proposition and you're all over the place, or you don't have one, or you have disagreements in those value propositions. But you may have a well-defined core. Then you may be wasting talent. If you have good people but no strategic direction. And if you move around to the upper right, if you're weakly defined in your assets, but you have a strategy, then you know where to go in the future. This is when you go to investors. This is the strategy to, we got a great idea. We got the next best thing coming out. We have this work through. We understand how to solve the problem of the mess. We've defined it. We have our concepts that moves above the line into the real world, into comparing it to what markets need. And this is where investors step in. This is a good thing, a good place to be. Now, if you're down in the lower right, you're struggling to survive. And so many firms find themselves in this position where they can't come up with a focus for their strategy, and their core, either as a result or as a consequence, is just not strengthened. And when you find yourself in that position, you need to do one of the two. You either need to really build up your core assets, or start defining a strategy that moves you forward. And again, this is like the SWOT analysis. This is a tool to help you think about strategic management and what to do there. Lastly, I'm going to talk about a tool called Idealized Design. Idealized Design is familiar to many of us. We always think about idealization, about thinking of the future. My analogy are two. One is golf. I don't hit the ball in the air in golf, but some people do. You're supposed to envision your swing. Envision the ball going where you want it to go before you do the swing. Another analogy is in the Olympics, Winter Olympics, the luge rider. In 30 seconds you're down this treacherous slope. and I heard an interview with a luge rider at one point, and they said, "Well, how do you drive?" He said, "You don't. You think about it beforehand. You map it out." And that's what an idealized design is. You work on mapping it out. You take a look at the mess, the problem definition, and you're working down below the double line. And you start thinking about what's the best. And if you think about what's the ideal for us, and then you work towards that ideal, or rather you work from the ideal to eliminate constraints. When you have an ideal, what you want to do is say, is it technically feasible and operationally viable? Can it work, and can we do this? You set yourself up for an idealized design. What are the best possible outcomes that we could have? And usually then we have constraints. You say, well, that won't work, or this won't work. And you start working on the constraints. But the big question about constraints is, are they self-imposed or imposed by others? So with self-imposed constraints, we could do something about it. Go back to the chart of systems methodology. When we're comparing, we're above the line again, and we're comparing our plan with reality. That's what this is about. Is the reality self-imposed, or the constraint self-imposed? Can we find a way? In this day and age, we're hearing repeatedly, the reason why we're not doing well is the economy. It's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy. But then you have to say to yourself, there are other people doing well in this economy. Why can't we do well in this economy? what are the constraints that are keeping us from doing well in the economy? So idealization is having this big picture, saying it's workable, we could do this, but what are the constraints from having us reach our idealization? And we start strategizing around those restraints. And go back to the core risk analysis, go back to the SWOT analysis. These are all tools to help move from that mess to the definition to below the line, where we wind up with a strategy that we then compare to reality, and from then we can make appropriate actions. So with that said, we have to look at strategy again as a thought tool. We're trying to kind of quell the storm of the business we're in. If things were going smoothly and we didn't have to develop anything, we wouldn't have a need for strategy. So what we have is the ability to sense what's going on with us, to put some definition, some closure on that stress, understand concepts that will deal with the mess or the stress, compare those concepts to reality, and then work on action plans. And if you do that, then you have what I would call strategic management. The outcomes, again, are value, not only for the customer, but also for the company, where you're retaining value. And I think as part of that is when competitive advantage comes to play. Now, this is a lot of information to be talked at, I guess, or visualized. And what I've done is, I've added a couple, or actually 4 books that are available to you that you might find interesting. And while some are dated, they have the really strong concepts of strategic management. The first, Russell Ackoff, Dr. Ackoff has written a number of books on the idealized design. And I'm just picking up one, Creating the Corporate Future, that's available. Dr. Ackoff, unfortunately, is long deceased, so he's not writing any new books, but his position has taken a strong role, and especially in operations management. And I would urge you to take a look at Ackoff. He's available on Amazon, and you could find him in a number of venues, to see how this idealized design and this systems methodology might work for you. Robert Hodgkinson and co-authors have written a textbook called Competing for Advantage. This is one of the best textbooks in all of strategic management. They cover a lot of bases. They have case studies that will help you think through these advantages one way or another, and they include a lot of the information that I've covered in this book. Henry Mintzberg, Dr. Mintzberg's at McGill University, has a book called Strategy Safari. Now, in your notes it says 1999. He's rewritten the book, and it should be coming out in a new edition currently. Again, available from all the sources for strategic management. And what Dr. Mintzberg does is create a field study. He cuts through all the types of planning. His model has 10 different types of planning, and lines up how you figure out who has the best role, what's the best advantage, how you manage yourself with each of those types of planning. Lastly, Richard Whittington, What is Strategy and Does It Matter, is kind of a condensed version of Mintzberg. The chart with the 4 types of strategy that I put forward comes from Whittington's book. And this is it's an interesting look at the definitions of the classic, the evolutionary, the process strategy, and the systemic strategy. It gives you a better picture of how this works. So with this said, I'm going to conclude to say what you've seen now is some concepts of strategy. And again, you probably have to rewind this, go back and see it. You have a couple tools that will help you understand how you could work with strategy, and then a short bibliography to give you a better background in the approach to strategy. So with that, I will wish you luck and sign off.